Okay, now it's time to create our second service in our application, and this one's going to be pretty simple in comparison to the last one, which wasn't particularly complicated. It was just a CRUD application, but our search service, and we are going for the cheap, easy search service here. We're not getting heavy lifting infrastructure in like Elasticsearch or something like that to build our search service. We're sticking with things that are going to run easily on our local development machines, and Elasticsearch is not one of those things. So we're going for a really simple search service because the goal of this course, remember, is microservices. It's not how to build the perfect search experience within an application. It's to demonstrate how we can communicate between services, and search is one of those services that we are going to add. So we're going to build a new project effectively. Again, this is going to be a .NET Web API. This time we're going to use MongoDB as the database technology that we're going to be using. Each microservice has to be responsible for its own data. We do not share databases between microservices. That's a law, if you like, with microservices. Otherwise, you're just really building a distributed monolith. And we're not doing that in this course. Of course, this is going to use Service Bus, but we're not there yet. We're just going to focus on building another service that's autonomous, that operates on its own without the need of another service to get data from or even care about whether or not that service is up and running. So we're going to create another service of that nature. We're going to install some packages, Automapper, MongoDB entities. This is kind of like the, I don't want to say equivalent to Entity Framework because it's nowhere near as big and all-encompassing, but it's kind of like a nice little package that's going to allow us to make link-like queries to a Mongo database rather than just directly accessing MongoDB and using Mongo API. We're able to write our queries in C# just as we can do in Entity Framework. So that's the reason we're going to install this one. But of course, we're going to take a look at it as and when we get to that point. In terms of queries, well, just one really, search. We're going to be able to get a paged list of auctions based on query parameters. And we'll also use it for filtering and ordering, etc. We won't actually use our auction service to get a list of auctions. We'll be using this particular service, the search service, to not only get search results, but also other results based on a query filter or an ordering filter, etc. We'll just have a single endpoint to do that. Whole bunch of events consumed by this service that we'll come onto when we need to, and just a single endpoint that I mentioned that's going to be API search with a query string parameter. And then we've got our models we're going to create. Now the item.cs is effectively going to be the same as our auction DTO, and the event consumed types, well, they're listed in here as well. But we'll come on to that. So for now, we're going to create our new project. We're going to clean it up, strip it down to its very basics, and then move forward from there. So we're going to open up the terminal, and I'm going to create a new tab. In fact, no, I'll use the second tab inside here to create it. So just as we did for our previous service, we'll use the .NET command line tool to do this. So I'm going to say .NET new web API, and I'm going to output this to source / search service and press return. And just so that we can get this appearing in our Solution Explorer view, because inside Solution Explorer it's only going to show us services that are added into that solution file. So we also need to say .NET sln add, and then we'll specify source and search service. And that will make the search service appear in this particular list. Now, just as before, we're going to clean things up. We're going to get rid of any demo code. We're going to get into the CS proj file for this particular service, and we're going to disable nullable. Otherwise, we're going to see a whole bunch of warnings that are quite painful to resolve when using this nullable feature. Maybe one day I'll embrace it, but today is not that day. We're going to stick with using C# as it always has been, where we know that things like strings are nullable by default. And we're also going to remove Swagger, just as we did before. We're going to continue to use Postman with our project. Now, I don't have much color inside here. I feel this should be colored something other than white, which means VS Code probably needs a kick. So I'm going to use the developer reload window and see if I can get some color back into my project file. And now I'm starting to doubt myself as to whether this was colored previously. Let's see what another class looks like. And I'll just take a look at the weather forecast. This one looks fine. Maybe this was always white and I'm misremembering. But anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and delete the weatherforecast.cs. We do not need that. And same goes for the controller. We also do not need the weather forecast controller in there either. I'll go to the properties folder next inside the launch settings.json, and once again I'm going to clean out any of the profiles that we're not using for this particular service. We only want HTTP, and we're going to run this on localhost 7002. Once again, please do not use HTTPS for any of the services we're creating just now. I will deal with HTTPS later, I promise you, but it's not going to be enabled on any of the services that we're going to create that are going to be effectively hosted on an internal network, and we only need HTTPS externally to our services. There's no client that's going to have direct access to our API endpoints, and we do not need to worry about it we do not need to worry about HTTPS on these services. So I'll just emphasize that because you will run into problems a bit later on if you do attempt to use HTTPS, even though your project will start up on your development machine just fine. And when you're running in development mode, you'll be thinking, well, it works for me in HTTPS, but I promise you when it comes to Docker, things get a lot more tricky when we Dockerize our containers. And that's the reason we're sticking with HTTP. We're not going to use a launch URL, and I'm also not going to launch the browser either, so I'm going to set that to false. And this is how we want our launch settings to look like. The controllers we've removed, the app settings development.json, I'll just update this to information because I normally do. And inside the program class, we're going to remove anything we're not using, with anything related to Swagger, for instance, that can go. And also the Swagger middleware, that can also go, as can the HTTPS redirection. And whilst we're here, I'm just going to add the packages that we need via NuGet. So I'm going to open up the NuGet gallery, and I'm going to search for mongodb.entities, as this is what we're going to be using to query our Mongo database. And this is going to go inside the search service, currently on version 22. And I'm going to install this one. And whilst I'm here, I'm also going to install Automapper. I know there's a few other packages listed in the spec sheet, but we'll come on to them when we need them. For now, I'm just going to install these two. And in fact, I don't think we need Automapper for quite some time, but I've installed it anyway. It doesn't do any harm. And before we go and move on to the next lesson, let's just cd into our new service. And let's just clear up some of the noise in here. And I'm just going to execute .NET build to make sure there's nothing wrong with what we've done and make sure that the build succeeds. And I'm just going to execute .NET watch just to make sure that we're running, and we're running on the correct port as well. We want to see HTTP localhost 7002. We want to see that we're running in development, and that all looks good. So we're ready to move on to the next lesson, which will be to add MongoDB into our project.